It's great to understand all our basic diatonic major and minor triads, as well as the one diminished triad that we have in every major key. But since there's only 7 of them, that can be very limiting. So we want to be able to graduate past just using those diatonic triads. So in this video, we are going to be talking about how to spice up our minor 3 chords. So full disclosure, the minor 3 chord is maybe my favorite of all the diatonic triads. This is probably just because I think it's severely underrated. It's probably my favorite of the 3 minor triads that we have naturally occurring in every key, because in every key we have 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished. So just to take C major, for example, our 1 chord in every major key is always going to be major. Our 2 is going to be minor. Our 3 is going to be minor. Our 4 is going to be major. Our 5 is going to be major. Our 6 is going to be minor. And then our 7 is going to be diminished. Of those, actually the rarest is the diminished, but the second rarest, according to any stat I've ever seen, is actually that minor 3 chord. And I think that's a real shame, because it is the only chord, or at least the only diatonic triad, that has both of the leading tones that you have within a key. Now, usually when we talk about the leading tone, we are talking about the 7th scale degree. So in the context of C major, that would be our B, which leads back to our C. So normally we're thinking of the 7th scale degree, but by definition, really a leading tone is any note that leads or resolves to another note that is either a semitone up or a semitone down. So in every key, we have 2 places where there are half steps or semitones. So we'll stick with C major. We have whole tone, half. So right here, we actually have a leading tone between our E and our F, even though we don't usually think of that as a leading tone in the context of C major. So then if we keep going, we have F to G, which is going to be a whole tone, and then again a semitone. Usually when we think of our leading tone, we're thinking of our 7th scale degree, for good reason, because that is our leading tone back to our tonic, our most important note in the context of the key, which is our 1, because in C major, the most important note and the most important chord is C major. But a part of the magic of a minor 3 chord is it actually utilizes both the E and the B. So the B wants to resolve up to that C, and then our E wants to resolve up to that F. So one of the beauties of this is that this chord so badly wants to resolve to a major 4. So an awesome chord progression idea can be just to utilize this 3 chord when normally you would go, say, straight to a 4 chord. Instead, go to that minor 3 and then go back up to the 4. For example, if we take a 1, a 5, a 6, and then instead of going to a 4, we go to that 3, and then to the 4. That can be a great chord progression, specifically sometimes surprising people by not going to the 4 when it's expected, but instead going to that 3, like a chord that it went too far down and then it raises back up. It's just a really, really great sound. So the first way to spice up your minor 3 chord is to utilize inversions. Specifically, what can be great about that minor 3 chord is that is the minor triad that's naturally occurring in every key, that with a certain inversion actually can contain your 7th scale degree in the bass. So what do I mean by that? Maybe for your bass line, you want to have a descending bass line starting with the 1 or the tonic. So in C major, you want to have C, B, A, and G, something like that. If you want to utilize that B, usually you're not actually going to have C major to B diminished to A minor and then to G major. Usually you're not going to do that, because usually the diminished chord is just a little bit too gnarly for a lot of songs and usually is going to be avoided. So you really have 2 options of the major and minor triads, not counting sus chords and things like that in this example. But if you want to just use a regular diatonic triad, your 2 options are basically the minor 3 chord or the major 5 chord. So if you want major tonality while you descend that bass line, you can do just a regular C major chord, and then have first inversion G major chord, and then just continue from there, A minor, back to G major. Or if you want to have minor tonality and utilize that 7th scale degree in the bass, you can use that 3 chord. So that you're basically playing second inversion of your minor 3 chord. So in this case, it would be E minor in second inversion, otherwise known as E minor/B, because again, B in the bass. So if you're interested in getting minor tonality while doing, say, a descending bass line, or just generally utilizing your 7th scale degree in the bass, and you want a chord to go on top of it that isn't that diminished triad that is naturally occurring built on that 7th scale degree. If you want to go major, fine, use the major 5. We talked more about that in the Spice Up Your Major 5 Chords video. But if you want minor tonality, be sure to utilize that minor 3. And then the other inversion that you get with your minor 3 chord is going to be with the 5 in the bass, because if we take our regular E minor triad, we have the 3, and then we have the 5, the G, and then we have the 7, the B. So we also can have something like, a C major chord, and then have G in the bass, but actually utilize an E minor chord. Maybe you want the bass line from a basic 1-5-6-4, right? But you don't actually want to do a 1-5-6-4. Something you could do to spice it up is instead, you're still going to that G, but instead, it's with a minor 3 chord instead of that major 5 chord. And another thing you can do to spice up your 3 chord is actually to make it major instead. Now, this is probably overutilized in the context of film music, this major 3 chord, but I would say is overall very underutilized by your average singer-songwriter or rock band or whatever type of music you're probably trying to write. It's probably underutilized. So generally, it tends to be used, at least in film music, as a secondary dominant for the minor 6 chord, which we'll get into in a second. And I'm going to have a whole other video breaking down what a secondary dominant is. But overall, a benefit that you get from any altered chord is that it is unexpected. Whenever there's a note that's happening in a chord that's outside of the context of the key that you've established, that automatically sort of hooks the listener as, oh, something's happening. They might not know what's happening yet, but that usually is a great way to catch the listener's attention and to generally just have a part of the music that really stands out. So if you're in C major and you have a 1 chord, and then a 4 chord, and then a 5 chord, and then a 4 chord, and then that major 3 chord, which in this context would be an E major chord instead of an E minor chord, that sounds notable because it's not what we expect. We already established that we have an A natural in this, and we already established that we have a G natural. So this note, which could be seen as either a G sharp or A flat, we know is like, that's not what was in this song, because I know there's a G natural and an A natural. Now, you might not know that or be thinking that, but our ears hear that. Our ears naturally are so attuned to what major sounds like and what minor sounds like that our ears, even if we don't know the theory behind it, our ears still are going to pick up like something there's different, something changed. So overall, utilizing a major 3 chord instead of the naturally occurring minor 3 can just be a really great way to change it up. But as I mentioned before, it's most often utilized as a secondary dominant. So the really short version of what a secondary dominant is a secondary dominant is a chord that is a major chord that is operating as a 5 chord to a chord that is naturally occurring in the key we're in. So basically, we're in C major. The major 5 chord in C major is G major because it's built off of the 5th scale degree. We have C, D, E, F, G. So 1, C, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our G major chord is our naturally occurring major 5 chord in the context of C major. So if we have a major chord that is not naturally occurring in our key, very often it will be utilized as a secondary dominant to another chord that is naturally occurring in our key. For example, we do have an A minor chord that is naturally occurring in our C major key. The secondary dominant for an A minor chord would be whatever is built off of its 5th scale degree. So in this case, we have A, B, C, D, E. So if we then take that 5th scale degree, E, and make a major chord off of it, so E major chord, that would be a secondary dominant to our naturally occurring minor 6 chord. So I don't want to get too deep into secondary dominants and all that they provide, but the really short version is that it gives us that leading tone to the chord we're actually trying to get to. So if we take our C major chord and then go to our major 3 chord, what this gets us is this leading tone to the A minor chord. That is the chord that is a secondary dominant of. So we're going basically from a 1 chord to a 5 chord of our 6 chord to our 6 chord. Again, if that confused you, don't worry about it. I'll have a separate video breaking down just what secondary dominants are. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If it was, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free guide breaking down the 4 pillars of music theory that I think every songwriter needs to know. If this was overwhelming to you and you're like, what is this 2 chord and 5 chord and 3 chord? What does all that mean? Then be sure to check out this free guide. It breaks down the 4 pillars I think are necessary for songwriters, or at very least are sort of the 20% that get 80% of the results. Although really it's more like the 5% that give 80% of the results. So be sure to check that out. My free gift to you. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.